New York City, a world that never seemed to rest, hummed around Olivia Matthews as she stood at the bus stop on a gray October morning. The sky was a dull shade of blue, the kind of sky that hinted at an impending storm, but for now it was calm, too calm for the fast-paced, restless city she called home. The usual chaos of the morning rush was in full swing, the screeching of subway trains and the honking of taxi cabs blending together like a chaotic symphony of urban life. But for Olivia, the noise felt like a distant hum, something she had grown used to over the years. She had lived in this city her entire life, in a small, humble apartment tucked away in the Bronx. The city was her home, but it was also a constant reminder of her place in the world. Always on the edge, never quite part of the higher echelons of society. Her hair was tied back neatly under a wool cap, her face shielded from the chilly breeze that nipped at her cheeks. She tugged her oversized coat tighter around her frame, gripping her purse with both hands as if it were the last lifeline connecting her to some semblance of order in her day. The soles of her black sneakers, well worn from years of use, scuffed against the pavement as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She was trying not to look at the flashing billboards above, the ones that promised effortless luxury, glamorous lifestyles, and a kind of success she knew was out of reach. She didn't mind her life, or at least she tried not to. There was something familiar in the rhythm of the subway, the steady pulse of the city beneath her feet. But every now and then, that familiar rhythm hit a sour note. Like today, the bus approached slowly, and Olivia could feel her stomach tighten in anticipation. The usual morning shuffle ensued as the other commuters piled onto the bus. Each person seemed to have their place. Young professionals, mothers with children, the occasional tourist, all moving with purpose. Olivia, though, felt herself becoming invisible again. She wasn't a part of their world, just a spectator to their fast-paced lives. The ones who had the fancy suits, the sparkling watches, and the briefcases they carried with such confidence. She watched them with a sense of longing for a moment when she didn't have to squeeze onto the bus, when she wouldn't be overlooked and underestimated. She stepped onto the bus as it stopped in front of her, the doors opening with a groan. The smell of coffee and cologne wafted past her, mingling with the musty scent of wet coats and damp leather. As she made her way down the aisle, she nodded at the driver, a man she'd seen so many times before but never exchanged more than a polite smile with. She chose a seat toward the back, away from the crowd. It was quieter there, a place where she could breathe and disappear into the background. But even in the back, she couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. She adjusted her coat and looked out the window. The city was waking up, the streets filling with people heading to work. The sun still hadn't fully broken through the cloud cover, casting a muted light over everything. The bus hummed along, the sound of the tires on wet asphalt filling the silence. Olivia had been doing this for years, taking the bus to work, never once questioning the simplicity of it. But lately, she'd begun to feel the weight of it. The city, with all its promise, seemed to tower over her in a way it hadn't before. And today, for some reason, the feeling was stronger than ever. Her mind wandered to the bakery she worked at, the only job she'd ever known. She loved the smell of fresh bread in the morning, the steady rhythm of kneading dough, the satisfaction of a job well done. But even there, she was still just the manager, never the boss. She had no choice but to settle for what she had, even though deep down, she wondered if there was more to life than this. As the bus made its way down Fifth Avenue, Olivia's thoughts were interrupted by a loud voice from the front of the bus. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Hey, look who it is, the bus rider." The voice was unmistakable, sharp and mocking. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. She didn't need to hear the rest of it. She could already feel the weight of the words pressing against her chest. Marcus Rhodes, an investment banker with his tailored suits and shiny shoes. He was the type of man who stood out in the crowd, who had everything she didn't. She had seen him many times before, walking past her as she waited for the bus or heading into his office in the morning. His life was one of luxury and privilege, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone around him of it. She heard him laugh, the sound grating against her nerves. "You're really still taking the bus, huh? Guess some people never get the memo." His words stung, but Olivia stayed silent, refusing to look up. She could feel the eyes of others on her now, the uncomfortable energy of people pretending not to notice, yet clearly aware of the exchange happening in front of them. She wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. She could feel her face flush, but she didn't let herself respond. There was no point. It was easier to just take it, to keep her head down and hope that, someday, the world would see her for more than just the invisible woman on the bus. She was used to it, after all. Used to being overlooked, used to being the quiet one who never demanded attention. It was safer that way. The bus rattled on, and the city continued outside, unaware of the small indignity she had just endured. As the minutes ticked by, Olivia sank further into her seat, trying to pretend that the words didn't matter. She pulled her coat tighter around her, as if that would shield her from the weight of it all. She couldn't wait to get off the bus. When the bus finally reached her stop, Olivia stood up, gathering her things. She pushed her way past a few people who didn't seem to notice her at all. As she stepped off the bus, the cold air hit her face like a slap, but it didn't matter. She was numb now, in a way. The world had been mocking her for so long. It felt as though she had no more fight left to give. She walked the few blocks to the bakery, her thoughts swirling. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Guess some people never get the memo. But as she walked, something inside her stirred. Something quiet, but insistent. She had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated for so long. But she knew, deep down, that she was capable of so much more than this. Maybe today, things would begin to change. Maybe the next time someone underestimated her, they'd be in for a surprise. But for now, she had a job to do. She could face the world. She always did. The morning passed in a blur of routine for Olivia Matthews. The bakery was quieter than usual. The hum of conversation and clinking of coffee cups soft against the clatter of trays being slid across countertops. It was a comfortable lull, a moment when the rush of breakfast had settled into a calm rhythm. She stood behind the counter, carefully arranging fresh loaves of sourdough on the display shelves, the bread still warm from the oven, their crusts golden brown, a pleasant scent wafting through the air. It was the same process she'd done every day for the past 10 years. Yet today, she couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled in her chest. The day before had been filled with echoes of Marcus Rhodes's mocking tone, still lingering like an unpleasant aftertaste. As she set the last of the loaves in place, Olivia felt the weight of her thoughts press on her. She knew she was supposed to be grateful for the work she had, for the steady income, the familiar routine, the sense of purpose it gave her. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was stuck, trapped in a life she had built for practicality's sake, not for passion or ambition. The bakery was a small one, nestled in a corner of the city where tourists rarely wandered. It had its regular customers, most of whom greeted Olivia with a smile as they picked out their daily bread, pastries, or coffee. To them, she was just another face behind the counter, someone who made their mornings a little brighter, but who they'd never think to ask about beyond the confines of the shop. She wasn't one to complain about the anonymity, but lately, she'd begun to feel the sharp sting of invisibility, especially when she stood in the shadow of people like Marcus Rhodes. The bell above the door jingled as a couple of regulars walked in, their footsteps slow and steady. They were both in their early 60s, their faces weathered with time, but still full of life. Olivia offered them her usual smile, greeting them with the warmth she had perfected over the years. The woman, who always wore her hair in a messy bun, asked for 2 croissants and a cup of black coffee, while her husband, a retired teacher, asked for the newspaper. As Olivia packaged their items, she noticed their small talk. They chatted about the weather, about the construction on the nearby street, about their son's wedding last month. They spoke of these small details with such ease, such familiarity. And for a brief moment, Olivia wondered what it would be like to live a life without the constant weight of worry. What would it be like to know, without question, that you had a place in the world, that your life had meaning beyond the small confines of your job and your routine? The thought faded quickly as she handed the couple their pastries and coffee, watching them disappear out the door with a polite thank you. Her gaze lingered on the empty space they left behind, the silence hanging in the air like a soft blanket. Olivia wiped down the counter, her mind drifting back to Marcus and the laughter that had followed his comment. She wondered if he even understood what he had done, how those few words had cracked something deep inside her. People like him, people with money, power, and status, often couldn't comprehend what it felt like to be constantly judged by others, to have your worth defined by your job, your income, or even the way you dressed. But she wasn't one to dwell on things. She had learned early on to push through the discomfort, to hide her feelings and keep moving forward. After all, it was all she could do. There was no room for weakness in her world. The clock on the wall ticked slowly toward noon, and the bakery remained quiet. Olivia found herself working more mechanically now, her movements automatic as she prepared ingredients for the afternoon batch of cookies. She measured flour with precision, poured sugar into the bowl without thinking, each motion a small act of control in a world that often felt beyond her reach. But in the quiet of the kitchen, the voices from the outside world began to intrude once again. Her mind wandered back to Marcus's mocking tone. He had no idea what it was like, no idea what it meant to fight for every little piece of stability in life. People like him didn't understand the constant struggle, the way every choice felt like a compromise, every decision marked by sacrifice. She thought of the way her father used to work on cars, spending long hours in the garage with nothing but the hum of the engine and the sound of his wrench against metal. He taught her how to work with her hands, how to fix things, how to build a life out of nothing. He told her once that it wasn't the job you did, but how you did it that mattered. He'd been a mechanic, and Olivia had always admired his quiet dignity, the way he carried himself without needing approval from anyone. But even he had never lived in a world where money and status didn't matter. He had always worked hard, struggled to make ends meet, and kept pushing forward, never once asking for more. Olivia wished she could be more like him. She wished she could take pride in her work without feeling like she was invisible, without feeling like there was a glass ceiling just above her head, one she could never quite break through. But it was hard to shake the feeling that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she gave of herself, she would always be seen as less than. She would always be the woman behind the counter, the one who cleaned the floors, the one who answered the phones and took the orders. As she worked, her mind drifted back to her son, Nate. He was everything to her, the reason she kept going, the reason she pushed herself to make ends meet. He had grown up faster than she had expected, his youthful optimism a stark contrast to the weariness that had settled in her bones. He had dreams, big dreams, of becoming a lawyer, of making a name for himself in the city. He had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. He had always seen her as someone more than just the woman who worked at the bakery. He saw potential in her, the kind of potential she had trouble seeing in herself. But tonight, when he came over for dinner, Olivia knew she had to tell him something. She had to admit that she was tired of feeling like she wasn't enough, tired of accepting the smallness of her life. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate what she had. She did, but she had started to wonder if there was something more out there for her, something she hadn't yet discovered. The rest of the afternoon passed by in a blur. As the sun began to set, Olivia closed up shop, wiped down the counters, and turned off the ovens. She grabbed her coat and stepped out into the cool evening air. The streets of the city were quieter now, the traffic easing as the night settled in. She walked the few blocks to her apartment, lost in thought. She thought about the life she had built, about her father's teachings, and about Nate's belief in her. But as she walked, there was something else stirring in her chest, an unfamiliar feeling, one that she couldn't quite name. It was a quiet, insistent pull toward something different, something more. Tonight, when Nate came over, she would tell him. She would tell him that she was ready to make a change. She wasn't sure how, but she knew it was time to start living for herself, to stop letting the world decide her worth. She had worked too long, too hard, to keep letting other people's opinions shape her life. The evening air was sharp against her skin, but Olivia felt a warmth inside her chest, a small spark that hadn't been there before. Tonight would be the start of something new, something she hadn't dared hope for until now. The evening passed quietly as Olivia sat at her small dining table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The steam rose from the mug, swirling in delicate tendrils before disappearing into the cool air of her apartment. It was a routine she had followed for years. Dinner alone, followed by a quiet evening spent with her thoughts. The world outside her window was still, the distant hum of traffic barely audible in the night. Her small kitchen, dimly lit by the overhead light, felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could gather her thoughts and, for a few hours, forget about everything that weighed on her. But tonight, as she sipped her tea, Olivia couldn't ignore the feeling that had been tugging at her since that morning. Something was shifting inside her. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no sudden revelation or burst of inspiration. It was subtle, like a quiet storm gathering on the horizon, one she could feel but couldn't yet see clearly. The weight of Marcus's words still lingered, but it was no longer just about the insult. It was about something deeper, a realization that she had been living in the shadows for too long. The clock on the wall ticked slowly as she sat there, lost in thought. She thought about her father again, the way he had always kept his head down and worked tirelessly, never asking for recognition or reward. His life had been one of sacrifice, of putting others first. But somewhere along the way, Olivia had inherited his sense of duty without his quiet strength. She had learned to give, to work hard, to endure. But she had never learned to ask for more, to demand a place for herself in the world. Tonight, as she waited for Nate to arrive, she felt something stir inside her. A quiet rebellion against the life she had built. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't frustration. It was simply the realization that she deserved more. She had spent too many years putting her own dreams on hold, letting the world define her by her job, her income, her position in life. But what if she didn't have to accept that anymore? What if she could walk into a room and be seen, not as the woman behind the counter, not as the one who took the bus, but as someone worthy of respect and opportunity? As she finished her tea, Olivia set the cup down and stood up, walking over to the window. She looked out at the city, the skyline bathed in the soft light of the street lamps. She had always felt small in this city, as though she were just a tiny part of something much larger, something she would never quite be able to touch. But tonight, she saw it differently. The city was vast, yes, but it was also full of possibility. People like her had come here from all over the world, each with their own dreams, their own struggles. They had fought for their place, for their moment to shine. Why couldn't she do the same? The sound of keys rattling at the door pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to see Nate walking in, his familiar grin lighting up his face. He was carrying a small duffel bag, probably full of work clothes, his usual attire after a long day at the office. Olivia smiled as he walked in, his energy filling the room with warmth. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice upbeat as he kissed her on the cheek. "How's it going?" Same old, she replied, trying to mask the swirl of emotions inside her. "You hungry? You know it." He dropped the bag on the couch and walked over to the kitchen. "Smells good in here. Spaghetti?" "Of course," she said, her lips curling into a smile as she went to the stove to stir the sauce. Nate pulled up a chair at the table, watching her as she worked. "So, how's the bakery? Everything okay?" Olivia paused, glancing over her shoulder at him. She could see the concern in his eyes, the way he was always worried about her, always looking out for her. She had spent so much of her life hiding her struggles from him, shielding him from the reality of how hard it was. She didn't want him to see her as weak, didn't want him to know how much she longed for something more than the life she had built. "It's good. You know, steady?" she replied, her voice calm, but she could feel the tension building in her chest. She turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce a little harder than necessary. "But Nate, I've been thinking." "Oh, when you start with that, I know something's on your mind," he teased, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, it's just, you ever get the feeling that life is passing you by?" she asked, her voice soft as she turned to face him. "Like you've worked so hard, but somehow you're still not where you want to be?" Nate looked at her for a moment, his face serious. I get that feeling sometimes, but you've got to keep pushing, right? Keep going, even when it feels like nothing is changing. Olivia nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been pushing for too long without ever stopping to think about what she really wanted. She had always focused on getting by, on surviving. She had never allowed herself to dream of anything bigger than what she had. But what if she could change that? What if she could reach for something more? As they sat down to D. projects and his plans for the weekend, Olivia listened intently, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him talk about his dreams and ambitions. He was everything she had hoped he would be: smart, driven, and full of hope for the future. He was the one who had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. After dinner, Nate leaned back in his chair, glancing over at his mother. "So, Mom," he began, his tone changing to one of curiosity. "What's been going on with you? I mean, I know things aren't always easy, but you seem different tonight." Olivia hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her empty plate. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure what to say. She had never been good at talking about her feelings, especially not with Nate. She didn't want him to worry about her. She didn't want him to see her as anything other than the strong, capable woman who had always provided for him. "I've been thinking a lot," Olivia said slowly, finally looking up at him. "I've spent my whole life working, trying to make ends meet, trying to do what's right. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I forgot about my own dreams, my own aspirations. And now, I'm wondering if it's too late to change." Nate sat up a little straighter, his expression softening as he took in her words. "It's never too late, Mom. You can always change. You've taught me that." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of her emotions threatening to break free. For so many years, she had carried the burden of her own expectations and the weight of her family's sacrifices. But tonight, with Nate's words, she felt a shift inside her. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could still do something for herself, still carve out a future that wasn't defined by the limitations she had placed on herself. She sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stirring inside her. Something that wasn't fear or doubt, but the quiet spark of hope. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time to stop living for everyone else and start living for me." The next morning was filled with a mixture of hope and unease, a blend Olivia couldn't quite shake off. The city outside her apartment was waking up with its usual speed and purpose. Cars honked, pedestrians rushed, and somewhere in the distance, the muffled sound of a subway train reverberated through the air. Olivia stood by the window of her apartment, sipping coffee, her gaze lost in the morning rush. The skyline, so familiar and yet so daunting, reminded her of everything she wanted, and everything that felt out of reach. But this morning, something felt different. The weight she had carried for so long, the one that made her feel small, had lightened just enough for her to see the possibility on the horizon. The conversation with Nate had shifted something deep inside her, a quiet but powerful force urging her to take action. She didn't know what that action would be yet, but it had to start somewhere. Olivia had always known she was capable of more than her circumstances allowed. Her father had taught her that hard work alone wouldn't always get you ahead. Sometimes, you had to take control of your future and claim it. But how? She had no idea how to begin changing the path she'd been following all these years. She worked long hours, made ends meet, and did everything she could to make sure Nate had a better life. But somewhere along the way, she had lost her own dreams. That day, Olivia decided to act, however small the step. After finishing her coffee, she grabbed her coat, threw her purse over her shoulder, and headed out the door. She knew what she had to do. She had spent too many years in the shadows, too many years watching other people live the life she'd once dreamed of. It was time to take control. As she walked down the streets of the city, her mind wandered to the idea of what she could become, what she could build for herself. She had heard whispers around town about the big corporate mergers taking place, the companies being sold, and the people getting richer by the day. Olivia knew nothing about stocks or high-powered corporate deals, or even what it would take to acquire a business. But she did know something else. She knew her bakery, every inch of it, inside and out. She had worked with every employee, every supplier, and every aspect of the business for years. She knew what worked, what didn't, and how to run things efficiently. She knew what it meant to build something from the ground up, to take pride in it. As she passed by a few stores and restaurants on her way, Olivia found herself considering something entirely new. It wasn't enough just to make ends meet anymore. She had the skills, the drive, and the instincts to take what she had and make something bigger out of it. The idea began to bloom, slowly and steadily, in the back of her mind. She wasn't sure how or when, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized this. She had spent enough time taking care of everyone else. It was time for her to take care of herself, to build something that was truly hers. By the time Olivia reached the bakery, her heart was racing. She had made up her mind. She wasn't just going to sit back and let things happen to her anymore. She would take the leap and do what was necessary to change her life. But first, she needed information, and she needed to take that first step into a world that felt completely foreign to her. That afternoon, Olivia found herself standing outside a large building downtown, the kind of office tower she had only ever seen from a distance. It was sleek and modern, with glass windows reflecting the bustle of the city. She had no business being here, or so it felt, but she had been researching the ownership of local businesses, looking into potential opportunities. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she had found online. "Hello?" A voice answered. "Hi, this is Olivia Matthews. I'm interested in speaking with someone about a potential business opportunity," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that gripped her. She could almost hear the uncertainty in her own words, but she pushed through it. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice replied, "You'll want to speak with Mr. Jameson. He handles acquisitions and business negotiations. Let me transfer you." As the call was transferred, Olivia's heart pounded. She could hear the ringing in her ear, each second feeling like an eternity. She had never made a call like this before. She wasn't one to ask for help, let alone seek out a deal. But here she was, trying to break free from the life she had always known. "Hello, Ms. Matthews?" A deep voice finally answered. "Yes, this is Olivia Matthews. I'm looking to discuss the possibility of acquiring a small business in the area. I'd like to speak to someone about what that would entail," she said, surprised at how clear and confident her voice sounded now. "Well, you've come to the right place," Mr. Jameson said with an easy charm. "Let's meet. I'll set up a time for us to discuss the details. How does tomorrow at 10 sound?" Olivia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "That sounds good." The conversation ended quickly after that, and she hung up the phone, her thoughts swirling. She had just scheduled a meeting to discuss buying a business. Felt surreal. She couldn't believe it. But the idea of stepping into something new, of taking control of her future, filled her with a quiet excitement. The following morning, Olivia dressed carefully. She chose her most professional outfit, a black dress she had worn for a few interviews in the past. It wasn't the most expensive suit, but it made her feel capable, presentable. The taxi ride to the office tower felt longer than it really was. As the driver maneuvered through the streets, Olivia's mind raced. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know if this would lead anywhere, but she knew one thing: she had to try. When she arrived at the office, she was greeted by a receptionist who led her to a conference room on the top floor. The view was spectacular, overlooking the entire city. The sheer size of the room, with its polished wood floors and large windows, made Olivia feel small. But she straightened her back and reminded herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Mr. Jameson entered shortly after, a tall man in his late 50s, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He smiled as he shook her hand, his grip firm. "Olivia Matthews, it's a pleasure," he said, his voice smooth and businesslike. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me," Olivia replied, sitting down at the polished table across from him. "I understand you're interested in acquiring a business?" he asked, settling into his chair. "Tell me what you're looking for." Olivia felt her nerves tighten again, but she held his gaze and spoke from the heart. "I've been running a bakery for over 10 years. It's a good business, but I know there's more I can do. I'm looking for an opportunity to expand, to step into something larger, and maybe even explore other markets. But I need the right guidance, the right partnerships." Mr. Jameson listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "I think you're on the right path. There are always opportunities in this city if you know where to look. I've worked with several businesses just like yours, helping them grow and thrive in ways they never thought possible." They talked for over an hour, going over her background, her goals, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Mr. Jameson was calm and professional, asking questions that forced Olivia to think more deeply about her future and what she wanted to achieve. He explained the complexities of business acquisitions, the steps involved in finding the right opportunities, and what it would take to make those dreams a reality. When the meeting ended, Olivia left with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She had taken the first step, but the road ahead was long, filled with decisions and risks she had never imagined. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the life she had been living. There was more for her to discover, more for her to create. Olivia spent the next few days in a whirlwind. The meeting with Mr. Jameson had left her with a lot to think about, but she had also felt something in her shift, like a seed being planted deep within her. As she continued her daily routine at the bakery, the familiar hum of the ovens, the chatter of the regular customers, and the steady rhythm of kneading dough began to feel like an echo of her past. A past she was ready to move beyond. Each day felt a little different now, like she was living in two worlds at once. The bakery, with its flour-covered countertops and the smell of fresh pastries, was still her foundation, her safe place. But as she mixed batter and dusted countertops, her mind often drifted to what could be, to the opportunities that might lie just beyond the next step. Olivia had always known she was capable of more than this, but until now, she had never dared to imagine what more might look like. That afternoon, as she prepared the dough for the day's batch of rolls, her thoughts turned again to the conversation she'd had with Mr. Jameson. His words echoed in her mind. "There's always opportunity if you know where to look." It had sounded like something from a motivational speech, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized he wasn't just talking in vague terms. He was offering her something concrete. He believed in the possibility of change, and for the first time in years, so did she. It wasn't easy to leave behind what was comfortable, even when it was clear that comfort had been stifling her potential. She had spent so many years hiding behind her work, behind the bakery, behind the walls she had built to protect herself from the world that seemed so much bigger than her. But now those walls felt more like a cage she had built herself, brick by brick, over the years. And for the first time, she was ready to tear them down. The more Olivia thought about the future, the more she realized that it wasn't just about money. It wasn't about acquiring the biggest business or the most impressive property. It was about building something that truly mattered, something that allowed her to step into her own power, to take ownership of her future. The idea of creating a legacy, of doing something that made a difference, started to fill her with a quiet excitement that she hadn't felt in years. But there was a question she kept circling back to. What was it that she truly wanted? That evening, after closing the bakery, Olivia sat down with a notebook, her pen poised above the blank page. The silence of her apartment wrapped around her, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling the only sounds. She thought about the dreams she'd put on hold for so long, the ones she'd buried under layers of duty and responsibility. She thought about her father, who had always been so steadfast in his quiet determination, and about Nate, who had always seen something in her that she had never seen in herself. She began to write. "I want to build something that lasts, something real, something that isn't just about survival but about thriving, something that leaves a mark." The words felt strange as they left her pen. She had never given herself permission to dream that big. She had always been so focused on getting by that she hadn't allowed herself to imagine what life could look like if she stopped holding back. She wrote more, filling page after page with thoughts and ideas, each sentence a small act of rebellion against the life she had accepted for so long. It felt liberating to put it all down, to name the things she wanted out loud, to own them. She wrote about the bakery, about how she could expand it, how she could transform it into something more than just a neighborhood spot. Something that could reach further, that could grow beyond the limits of her current life. She wrote about investing in something bigger, about her vision for creating a space that brought people together, something that offered not just food but a sense of community. She wrote about her fears, too, the fear of failure, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of being seen as just the baker for the rest of her life. But there was something else, something that pushed those fears aside. She wrote about the possibility of becoming a woman who took control, a woman who didn't settle, a woman who built her life on her own terms. And the more she wrote, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about business. This was about identity. This was about who she was and who she was becoming. By the time she finished, it was well past midnight. Her eyes were tired, but her heart felt lighter, freer than it had in years. The pages in front of her were filled with ideas, yes, but also with something more important, hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that was naive or unrealistic. It was the kind of hope that came from knowing that she had the power to change her own story, to take the steps necessary to build a life that aligned with who she really was. The next morning, Olivia woke early. The decision she had made the night before felt like a quiet promise to herself. She wasn't going to let fear or doubt hold her back anymore. She wasn't going to wait for permission or approval from anyone. She was going to make this happen one step at a time. She went about her day with a sense of purpose that felt foreign but exhilarating. As she prepped for the bakery's morning rush, she felt a sense of control she hadn't felt in years. There was something about taking ownership of her future, even if she didn't have all the answers yet, that made everything feel possible. The steady rhythm of the bakery, the comforting sounds of the ovens and mixers, seemed to echo her newfound resolve. When the first customer of the day walked in, Olivia greeted them with a warmth that surprised even herself. She had always been friendly, of course, but today there was something different about it. Today, her smile wasn't just the polite gesture of a worker. It was the smile of someone who knew her worth, who knew that she was more than just the woman behind the counter. She was a woman who had a vision, who had a plan. She was a woman who could make things happen. By the time the lunch rush hit, Olivia's mind was no longer focused solely on the bakery. It had shifted toward what came next. She thought about meeting with Mr. Jameson again, about the next steps in the process. She thought about how she would approach the potential acquisition of a new business, how she could bring her vision to life. She thought about Nate, how proud he would be of her when he saw the changes she was starting to make. She could already picture his face. Surprised, proud, maybe even a little in awe of the woman his mother was becoming. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Olivia worked through the steady stream of customers, but her mind kept returning to her plans, to the future she was beginning to see clearly. She knew there would be challenges ahead. There always were, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face them. As she closed up the bakery that evening, Olivia felt a deep sense of peace. The shift inside her, the one that had started as a quiet whisper and grown into something more, was real. And now it was time to move forward. One step at a time, she would make her dreams a reality. There was no turning back now. The days that followed felt like a blur of motion, but they were different somehow. Each morning, Olivia woke with a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. It wasn't just about opening the bakery anymore. It was about something bigger, something she hadn't fully grasped until recently. The shift inside her, quiet and subtle at first, was now a constant hum beneath the surface, driving her forward with an energy she couldn't ignore. As she stood behind the counter, watching the early morning light filter through the bakery's windows, Olivia felt the weight of the decisions she had made. She wasn't just managing a business anymore. She was beginning to take charge of her life in a way she hadn't before. The dream she had written down a few nights ago was no longer just a vision on paper. It was becoming real piece by piece. But the first real challenge came when Olivia walked into the bakery one morning and found that something had shifted. She had always been in charge of the bakery's daily operations, but as the business had grown, She had hired a few more employees to help out, mostly part-time workers who were still finding their footing. But lately, she had noticed a subtle tension between them. They were good people, all of them, but some had begun to show signs of passive resistance. It wasn't that they were outright disrespectful, but Olivia sensed an underlying shift. It felt as though they no longer saw her as the authority figure in the bakery, but as just another worker trying to keep things afloat. One morning, as Olivia made her way into the back room to check on the new batch of croissants, she overheard two of her employees, Gina and Mark, talking. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their conversation was hard to ignore. "I just don't get it." Gina's voice was low, but Olivia caught the frustration in it. "Why is she making all these changes? The bakery's fine, Her chest tightened, her mind racing. She wasn't surprised. She had felt this resistance growing for a while. People didn't like change, especially when it came from someone they viewed as just another worker, just another person who had once been one of them. Olivia had always been careful about not making waves, not asserting her authority too forcefully. But now, as she overheard the conversation, she realized something. She had to assert her authority, not just because it was her business, but because she had earned it. She took a deep breath, collecting herself, and then walked into the back room, interrupting the conversation. Both Gina and Mark looked up, their faces quickly shifting to neutral expressions, as though they had been caught doing something they shouldn't have. "Is everything okay?" Olivia asked, her voice calm but firm. She was no longer the woman who would shy away from confrontation, no longer the woman who had let herself be pushed to the sidelines. She was a business owner, and she had every right to make the changes she saw fit. Gina shifted uneasily. "Yeah, just talking, you know?" she mumbled. Olivia nodded. "I get it, but I want to be clear with both of you. The changes I'm making are for the bakery's growth. This business isn't just about making ends meet anymore. It's about building something sustainable, something bigger. And I need everyone on board with that. If you're not, we need to have a conversation about whether this is the right fit for you." The words hung in the air, heavier than Olivia had intended, but necessary. She wasn't asking for their approval anymore. She wasn't looking for their permission. This was her business now, and she had to lead it as if she believed it. She had to lead with confidence, even if it made some people uncomfortable. Gina and Mark exchanged a look before Gina spoke up. "I get it. Just, sometimes it feels like we're doing things that are beyond us. We're just trying to keep up." Olivia softened, understanding the fear that accompanied the unknown. "I know it's a lot, but I believe in all of you. We're in this together and we're going to grow together. I'm not asking you to change overnight, but I need your support." There was a long silence as the two employees processed what she had said. Finally, Mark nodded. "All right, we're with you, Olivia. We'll make it work." Olivia nodded, relieved. "Thanks. I appreciate it." As she left the back room and returned to the front of the bakery, she could feel a sense of power settle within her. A quiet, internal shift. It wasn't just about asserting control over the bakery. It was about asserting control over her life. She had done what she needed to do, and she had done it with grace and authority. The resistance wasn't gone completely, and Olivia knew it would take time for the team to adjust to her new role. But the dynamic had shifted. She could feel it in the air. She was no longer just the woman behind the counter, quietly making dough and cleaning up after customers. She was the woman who owned the bakery. She was the one making the decisions, the one who had the vision for what this place could become. The next few weeks were a mix of progress and setbacks. Olivia continued to push forward with the changes she had discussed with Mr. Jameson, starting with a few small tweaks to the bakery's menu. She introduced new pastries, focused on improving the quality of her coffee, and even began offering catering for local businesses and events. The changes weren't massive, but they made an impact. Customers began to notice the difference in the quality of the products, and the bakery's reputation slowly started to grow beyond the familiar circle of regulars. But even as business began to improve, Olivia's authority continued to be tested. She encountered resistance from a few more employees, ones who weren't as comfortable with the pace of change. It wasn't always easy to navigate these situations, but Olivia learned quickly how to stand her ground. She began holding regular meetings with her staff, discussing the vision for the bakery, addressing concerns, and, most importantly, making sure everyone felt heard. It wasn't just about dictating change. It was about bringing everyone along for the ride. She also began working more closely with Mr. Jameson, who had become a mentor of sorts, guiding her through the business acquisition process. Olivia had always seen herself as someone who was good with people, good with numbers, and good at managing the day-to-day operations. But there was so much she didn't know, especially when it came to the financial side of things and the intricacies of business growth. Mr. Jameson was patient, answering her questions and helping her develop a strategic plan for the future. In those moments, Olivia could feel the walls she had built for herself starting to crack. She was learning, growing, and most importantly, stepping into a version of herself she had never allowed herself to be before. She was becoming someone who could navigate the world of business with confidence, someone who could stand toe-to-toe with anyone, whether they were a customer, an employee, or a corporate executive. The quiet woman she had been was starting to fade away, replaced by the woman who knew exactly what she was capable of. One evening, as Olivia sat in her small office at the back of the bakery, reviewing the financial projections for the next quarter, she glanced up at the clock. It was almost closing time, and the last of the evening customers had filtered out, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. She stretched, feeling the tension in her back and shoulders, but there was a sense of fulfillment in her movements. She had spent so many years working tirelessly, never quite feeling like she had the recognition she deserved. But now, as she looked over the numbers, she saw the fruits of her labor. This wasn't just a small bakery anymore. This was something she could be proud of. She stood up, walked over to the counter, and took a moment to look out the window at the city streets beyond. The lights flickered in the distance, the hum of the city continuing on, oblivious to the small victory she had just achieved. For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt like she belonged in that world, a part of it. Not just as a spectator, but as a player. The shift inside her had been profound. And though there were still many challenges ahead, Olivia was no longer afraid. She had found her strength, her voice, and her authority, and nothing was going to stop her now. As the days slipped by, Olivia began to feel the growing weight of her decisions. The bakery was no longer just a place where she made a living. It was a foundation for her future, a future that was starting to feel within reach. The changes she had implemented were starting to show results. The new menu items had been well received by the regulars, and a few new faces were starting to pop up during the lunch rush. The catering service she'd started had brought in a few corporate clients, and the increased exposure had begun to generate some buzz. But with growth came challenges, and Olivia knew that she couldn't rest on her laurels. She had made a promise to herself that this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. But thriving required more than just a few changes to the menu. It required leadership, vision, and the ability to adapt. One Friday afternoon, Olivia was in the back of the bakery, cleaning up after the morning rush, when she noticed something unsettling. There was a growing sense of unease among her employees, an undercurrent of resistance that seemed to be taking root in the quieter corners of the bakery. It wasn't overt. No one was openly defying her. But Olivia could sense it. There were the subtle glances exchanged between employees, the hushed conversations in the back room, the body language that spoke louder than words. She had seen this before. It wasn't just the usual growing pains that came with any business. It was something deeper, something personal. It was Gina and Mark again. Both had been with her for years, and she had always trusted them. But lately, Olivia had noticed a shift. They had always been steady workers, the kind of people who showed up every day and did what was asked of them. But now, they seemed to be questioning everything, from the menu changes to the new business strategies. Their frustration wasn't just about the work itself. It was about the fact that the bakery was changing, and they weren't sure if they wanted to change with it. Gina, in particular, had always been a bit more vocal in her opinions, but Olivia had always appreciated her candor. What she had once seen as a refreshing honesty was now starting to feel like subtle rebellion. And it wasn't just the changes in the business that had caused tension. It was Olivia herself. As the bakery grew, so did Olivia's authority, and that shift hadn't been easy for some of her employees to accept. As Olivia scrubbed the counter, her thoughts drifted to the conversation she'd overheard a few days ago. She hadn't been eavesdropping, but the words had hit her like a cold slap. Gina had been complaining, saying that Olivia was changing everything, and that she didn't need to be some big corporate thing. Olivia had heard this kind of resistance before from others who were content with the status quo. But she had come to realize something crucial. She couldn't be afraid of the discomfort that came with growth. Later that afternoon, Olivia decided to confront the issue head-on. She called a staff meeting, something she hadn't done in months. It was time to lay everything out on the table, to address the tension and let her team know where she stood. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was necessary. As the team gathered around the large table in the back of the bakery, Olivia felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. She wasn't sure how they would react, but she knew she couldn't back down. The bakery was hers, and if she wanted it to succeed, she had to lead with authority, even if it made people uncomfortable. "All right, everyone," Olivia began, her voice steady but firm. "I know we've been through a lot of changes lately, and I can sense some of you are feeling unsure about where things are headed. I get it. Change is hard, especially when it feels like it's happening so fast. But I want to make something clear. I'm not doing this to make anyone's life harder. I'm doing this because I believe in this bakery, and I believe in each one of you." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was quiet, all eyes on her. "I know we've had our challenges. I know some of you have been with me for a long time, and things feel different now. But that doesn't mean we're leaving anyone behind. This bakery is still a family, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward." Gina and Mark exchanged a look, and Olivia could feel the tension in the room rising. This was the moment of truth. She had to make them understand that her vision for the bakery wasn't about alienating anyone. It was about growth, not just for the business but for everyone involved. "I understand that some of you may feel like things are changing too quickly," Olivia continued, her voice softening. "But I need you to trust me. We're building something bigger than any of us, and we're doing it together. I need your support. We all need to be on the same team if we're going to make this work. And I'm willing to listen to your concerns. But we can't keep moving forward if we're not all committed to this vision." Gina's eyes softened as Olivia spoke, and Mark nodded, though his expression was still guarded. The room was still, the weight of Olivia's words hanging in the air. For a moment, there was no sound except the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Gina spoke. "You're right. I've been frustrated, but I understand now. I wasn't sure if we were going too far too fast. I didn't want to lose what we had here. But if you believe this is the way forward, then I'll follow." Mark gave a small, hesitant nod. "Yeah, I get it. I've been having a hard time adjusting, but I'll give it a shot. I'm with you, Olivia." Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. She had done it. She had confronted the issue head-on, and instead of running away from it, she had embraced it. It wasn't about being a perfect leader. It was about being willing to listen, to communicate, and to make tough decisions for the good of the business. As the meeting ended, Olivia felt a sense of quiet triumph. The road ahead wouldn't be without its bumps, but she had shown her team that she was capable of leading them through it. She was no longer just the woman behind the counter. She was the woman who had earned their respect, and that was a power she had never fully understood until now. The next few weeks brought more challenges, but Olivia faced them with a newfound confidence. As the bakery continued to grow, so did her leadership. She made decisions with clarity, balancing the needs of the business with the needs of her employees. She implemented new training programs, streamlined operations, and began working on expanding the bakery's reach even further. But more importantly, she was no longer afraid of her own power. She knew she was capable of leading this business to success, and she knew that the people around her, whether they had been with her from the beginning or were just joining the team, needed to understand that. She wasn't just running a bakery anymore. She was building a legacy, and no one, not even her employees, would be allowed to stand in the way of that. As the sun began to set on another long day, Olivia looked out at the bakery, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had worked hard for this moment, and she had earned her place at the head of the table. She wasn't just a worker anymore. She was a leader, and that, she realized, was a power she would never again allow herself to underestimate. The weeks that followed Olivia's moment of reflection were transformative, not only for her but for the bakery as well. The subtle shift in her own mindset began to have a ripple effect, reaching into every corner of the business and spreading throughout her team. Olivia wasn't just running a bakery anymore. She was leading it, and in doing so, she was laying the foundation for a future that would be marked by her quiet strength and determination. The bakery's success continued to build steadily, with regulars returning for the new menu items and corporate clients becoming more frequent. The catering side of the business was thriving as word of mouth spread among local offices, and Olivia's new partnership with Mr. Jameson had opened up opportunities for further investment and growth. Each new step, each small victory, added another layer of confidence to Olivia's growing sense of purpose. She had always believed in the power of hard work, but now she was beginning to understand that hard work alone wasn't enough. It was about direction, vision, and the courage to take bold steps when necessary. But despite all of this progress, Olivia had learned that leadership wasn't just about outward success. It wasn't just about balancing the books or expanding the customer base. It was about creating a legacy not defined by what you achieved, but by the impact you had on others along the way. And as the bakery continued to grow, Olivia found herself reflecting on what kind of legacy she truly wanted to leave behind. She knew that success could be measured in many ways, by revenue, by reputation, or by the number of employees she had working for her. But the true measure of success, she realized, would come from the relationships she built with her employees, the trust she earned from her customers, and the quiet, steady determination she showed in the face of adversity. It was about creating a business that stood as a reflection of her values: hard work, authenticity, and the belief that every person, no matter their position, mattered. As Olivia moved through the days, overseeing operations and making key decisions, she began to notice something else happening. Something she hadn't expected. Her employees were starting to take ownership, too. There was a subtle shift in their demeanor, a newfound sense of pride in the work they were doing. They were no longer just following orders. They were contributing ideas, suggesting improvements, and taking the initiative to make the bakery a better place. Olivia realized that, in finding her own strength, she had inspired others to find theirs. One afternoon, as Olivia was working on the new budget for the upcoming quarter, she noticed Gina, who had been with the bakery for years, pulling her aside. The last few months had been a journey of growth for Gina as well. She had moved from being one of the most resistant to change to becoming one of Olivia's most dedicated supporters. Olivia had seen her take on more responsibilities, and had even started to see Gina step into a leadership role herself. "Olivia," Gina said, her voice hesitant but sincere, "I've been thinking. You've really changed the way I look at this business, and myself. I've always been content with just getting by. But after everything we've been through, I don't want to just work here. I want to help grow this place, help it become something bigger." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Gina had always been a talented and hardworking employee, but hearing her express that kind of ambition was a sign of how far they had come as a team. It wasn't just about the bakery anymore. It was about creating something together, a legacy that they could all be proud of. "I'm glad you feel that way, Gina," Olivia said, her voice full of warmth. "We're all in this together. I can't do it alone. I want to see you grow, too." Gina's eyes lit up, and she nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to help you with the expansion, Olivia. Maybe we could start looking into opening a second location, or even branching out into catering full-time. I've been talking to some of our clients, and there's a lot of potential." Olivia felt a rush of excitement at the thought. A second location? Full-time catering? It was exactly what she had been thinking about but hadn't known how to begin. Gina's initiative made Olivia realize that the bakery wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had put in the work, everyone who had helped build it from the ground up. "Let's do it," Olivia said, her voice steady and resolute. "We'll start looking into the next steps. It's time to take this bakery to the next level. And we'll do it together." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as Olivia, Gina, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to lay the groundwork for expansion. Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose as she juggled the challenges of scaling the business. The logistics of opening a second location, securing a larger catering contract, and refining the bakery's operations were daunting, but Olivia didn't back down. She had come too far to let anything stand in her way now. One morning, as Olivia sat at her desk, reviewing a new proposal for a catering event, the door to her office opened, and Nate walked in. He had been out of town for a few days on a business trip, and Olivia hadn't seen him since the conversation they had had months ago about her plans. She could tell by the way he walked in, with that familiar twinkle in his eye, that he had something to say. "Hey, Em, you could say that. It's been a crazy few months, but it's all coming together." "I can tell," Nate said, looking around the office with admiration. "I've been hearing a lot about you, you know? People are starting to talk. Not just about the bakery, but about you. You're really making waves, Mom." Olivia felt a rush of warmth flood her chest. She had always wanted Nate to be proud of her, but hearing him speak so confidently about her accomplishments made her realize just how far she had come. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, her voice soft. "I'm still working on figuring it all out, but I'm getting there." Nate pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "You're more than getting there. You're crushing it. I don't think I've ever seen you like this before, Mom. You're not just running a bakery anymore. You're building something that's going to last." Olivia looked at her son, a smile tugging at her lips. He had always believed in her, even when she couldn't see her own potential. And now, as she looked at him, she realized that this journey wasn't just for her. It was for him too. She was building a future, not just for herself, but for the people she loved, for the legacy she would leave behind. "I'm doing this for you too, Nate," Olivia said, her voice filled with emotion. "I've spent my life making sure you had everything you needed. Now, it's time for me to do something for myself." Nate reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "I know, Mom, and I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." In that moment, Olivia realized that her journey was about more than just business success. It was about proving to herself, and to those she loved, that it was never too late to change, to grow, to build something bigger than the life she had known. She had spent so many years doubting herself, letting fear and insecurity dictate her choices. But now, she stood on the cusp of something new, something she could be proud of. Her bakery wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she had overcome. It was the foundation of her legacy, one she would leave behind for Nate and for anyone who ever felt like they didn't belong, like they couldn't achieve more. Olivia wasn't just a baker anymore. She was a woman who had built a future, step by step, with her own two hands. And as she looked at her son, she knew that the legacy she was creating would be one of quiet strength, a strength that would carry forward long after she was gone. The bakery had flourished, as had Olivia's sense of self-worth. The long, hard hours she had spent building this place from the ground up were beginning to bear fruit. Word was getting out. The steady hum of customers had increased into a steady stream, with the new menu items becoming favorites, and the expansion into catering generating a buzz among local businesses. The challenges she faced were still present. There were late nights spent reviewing numbers, phone calls with investors, and the occasional struggle to keep her employees motivated as the business grew. But despite it all, Olivia felt more confident than ever. Yet, even as her professional life blossomed, there was one lingering thought that always resurfaced. It was something she had pushed to the back of her mind, unsure of how to face it. That thought, though, was becoming harder to ignore. It was Marcus Rhodes. Marcus had crossed Olivia's path in such an insignificant way, At least she had thought so at the time. The mocking words from that morning on the bus had stung deeply, but as time went on, she told herself that she didn't need his validation. She had told herself that she didn't care what someone like him thought. But what if she had been wrong? What if she had cared more than she let on? Marcus had been a symbol of everything Olivia had never had, everything she had worked so hard for, and everything she felt was just out of her reach. He was the polished, well-groomed, well-spoken man who had spent his days climbing the corporate ladder, while Olivia had spent hers waiting tables, kneading dough and scrubbing floors. He had the luxury of not worrying about where the next paycheck came from, while she had always been in survival mode, doing everything she could to keep things afloat. She had hated the way Marcus had looked at her that day. The smirk, the arrogance, the mockery. But more than that, Olivia had hated the way she had felt. Small, invisible, worthless. It wasn't about the bus. It was about everything that the bus had come to represent. The limitations she had lived under, the belief that she was destined to always be overlooked, the quiet acceptance of her place in the world. But Marcus had inadvertently cracked something in her. It was as if he had been the mirror that reflected her deepest insecurities. But now, looking back at the woman she had become, Olivia realized something that she hadn't before. She was no longer that woman. She had stepped out from the shadows, from the shadow of her past, and into the light of her own power. The bakery wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was a manifestation of everything Olivia had fought for, everything she had longed for. It was proof that she could achieve something, that she could change her life. And the more she thought about it, the more Olivia realized that Marcus, and people like him, had been wrong about her. He had dismissed her that day, but Olivia was no longer the person who could be dismissed. So when Olivia received a call from a mutual acquaintance a few weeks later, someone who had worked with Marcus in his corporate firm, she was both surprised and hesitant to take it. The person on the other end of the line offered an invitation to an event, a prestigious fundraiser for a local charity, hosted by none other than Marcus Rhodes. It was an event meant for the city's elite, filled with people from the upper crust of society, people who, like Marcus, had never thought twice about the people who worked for a living. The kind of people who looked down their noses at those who took the bus. The kind of people who had always been out of reach. At first, Olivia had considered turning it down. She had no interest in mingling with the likes of Marcus. She didn't need to be in the presence of people who would judge her based on her past, on her appearance or her occupation. But as she sat there in the quiet of her office, the invitation in her hands, a new thought occurred to her. What if this was her chance? What if it was time to show the world, not just Marcus, that she had found her place, that she was no longer a shadow but a presence, someone whose worth couldn't be measured by the car she drove or the suit she wore. For the first time in years, Olivia allowed herself to feel something different, determination. She accepted the invitation, but not as the woman she had been. She accepted it as the woman she had become, a business owner, a leader, a force in her own right. The night of the event arrived, and Olivia found herself standing before the mirror in her modest apartment, her reflection staring back at her with a mix of uncertainty and resolve. She had never been one for fancy clothes, but tonight, she had chosen something that made her feel powerful. A simple black dress, fitted to her frame, paired with a delicate necklace Nate had given her for her birthday. The ensemble wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant, understated, and confident. She took one last look at herself, smoothing her hands over the dress, and then left her apartment, heading toward the venue. The drive there was filled with a knot of nerves in her stomach, but it wasn't the kind of nervousness she had felt before. This wasn't fear. It was anticipation, the kind that came from knowing that she was about to step into a world that had once felt closed off to her. When she arrived at the event, the entrance was flanked by tall, glittering lights, the building towering above her like a monument to the wealth and power it housed within. She could hear the chatter of well-dressed guests spilling out of the lobby, laughter echoing from inside, the clinking of glasses, the soft shuffle of polished shoes across marble floors. It was the kind of event she had only ever seen on television, an event that had always seemed so far removed from her own world. As she stepped into the building, Olivia felt a wave of unfamiliarity wash over her. The grandeur of it all made her feel small for a moment, and she hesitated in the doorway. But then, she remembered who she was now, the woman who had built something with her own hands, the woman who had earned her place. Taking a deep breath, Olivia walked in. Her presence was like a ripple in the water, unnoticed at first. She made her way toward the bar, grabbing a glass of water to steady her nerves. She didn't have to look far to find Marcus. He was standing in the center of the room, his back straight, a glass of red wine in his hand. He was talking to a group of other well-dressed men and women, all laughing and enjoying the evening. But when his eyes fell on Olivia, there was a brief flicker of recognition in his gaze, followed by a flicker of confusion. Olivia held his gaze, her back straight and her shoulders squared. She wasn't the same woman who had taken the bus months ago. She was different now, and he would have to see that. "Olivia," Marcus said, walking toward her with a forced smile. "What a surprise." "Surprise?" Olivia replied, her voice steady, not betraying the years of doubt and fear that had once plagued her. "I didn't expect to see you here." He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her presence. "You don't exactly strike me as someone who would be into charity galas." Olivia met his gaze without flinching. "You don't know anything about me, Marcus," she said quietly. "But tonight, I'm here because I believe in what's possible. Maybe you should try believing in it too." He looked taken aback by her response, but before he could say anything, Olivia turned and walked away, making her way across the room with a quiet grace. The air around her felt different now. It wasn't just the event, the people, or the luxury that surrounded her. It was her. As she mingled with others at the event, making small talk with potential clients and business partners, Olivia realized something important. She no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. She wasn't here to win approval from Marcus or anyone else. She was here because she belonged. And when the evening came to an end, Olivia left with her head held high. She had done it. She had stepped into a world she once thought was out of reach, and she had done so on her own terms. The weeks following Olivia's appearance at the gala were a blur of continued momentum and personal reflection. She had taken the step into a world she once believed was inaccessible, and now she was fully entrenched in it. It was as though everything had converged in perfect timing: her internal growth, her evolving leadership at the bakery, and the broader ambitions she had nurtured in secret for so long. But the most profound change wasn't just external. It was in the way Olivia saw herself. She had crossed a threshold that she hadn't even realized existed, and with it came a sense of quiet triumph that no one could take away from her. Back at the bakery, things were beginning to hum with a renewed energy. The second location was now in the early stages of planning, and her catering business had expanded to serve larger clients. The influence she had gained through her hard work and careful strategy was tangible. But it wasn't just the physical space of the bakery that had grown. Olivia had begun to shift the culture within her team. They were no longer just employees. Many of them had begun to take ownership, as Gina had, leading their own initiatives and pushing for improvements. Olivia had inspired them, not with grand speeches or promises, but through her actions and unwavering dedication. The partnership with Mr. Jameson had blossomed into something even more fruitful than Olivia had expected. He was still guiding her in the process of navigating the complexities of expanding her business and securing the capital needed for a larger-scale operation. He had been more than just an advisor. He had become a mentor, someone who encouraged her to think bigger, to see the possibilities she had once doubted. And now, with everything falling into place, Olivia found herself looking toward the future with excitement, not fear. But even as she basked in this quiet triumph, Olivia knew the importance of staying grounded. She hadn't forgotten where she had come from: the bus rides, the cramped apartment, and the long hours in the bakery when it seemed like nothing would ever change. She thought of her father often. His steady hands, his quiet perseverance. He had built something from nothing, but he had never lived to see the fruits of his labor as Olivia had. Olivia owed it to him, to herself, and to Nate to continue building, to keep reaching higher. She wanted to leave a legacy that would last, something that would honor the sacrifices her family had made. One evening, after closing up shop and locking the doors, Olivia found herself sitting at her desk in the back office, reviewing the financial statements for the past month. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep things organized, but tonight, as she glanced over the numbers, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. For the first time in her life, her success wasn't just a reflection of her ability to survive. It was a reflection of her ability to thrive, to succeed on her own terms. She had taken the steps necessary to make that happen, and now she was seeing the results. But there was one final step to complete, the final piece of the puzzle that would make everything official. She had decided it was time to formally take over the building where her bakery operated. The lease agreement had always been with a third party, and Olivia had been operating under the assumption that she would never own the space. But things had changed. Now, she was ready to take control of her future in the most literal sense. Olivia stood up and walked over to the window. The city sprawled out before her. She could see the lights flickering in the distance, a reminder of the world outside the bakery. But inside, there was a quiet peace, a feeling of accomplishment that radiated from the core of her being. The shift from the woman who had once felt like she was always on the outside, always looking in, to the woman who now stood firmly in the center of her own life was profound. The doorbell jingled, signaling someone had entered the bakery. Olivia turned around, smiling as she saw Gina walk through the door, her face bright with excitement. She had been working late on a catering project, and it was clear she had something important to share. "Olivia," Gina said, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "I just got off the phone with a potential new client for our catering service. They're interested in booking us for a series of corporate events next month. They're big, Olivia. Really big." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Corporate events were the next logical step in expanding her catering business, and securing a high-profile client would push her to new heights. She had worked hard to establish a reputation for quality and service, and now it was paying off. "That's amazing, Gina," Olivia said, rising from her chair and crossing the room to join her. "This is exactly what we've been working toward." "I think we're ready for this," Gina replied, her eyes gleaming. "We have everything in place, and we've got the team to pull it off. I think this is the moment we've been waiting for." The next few days were a blur of activity as Olivia and her team worked to prepare for the big event. There were menus to finalize, logistics to sort out, and staff to organize. But throughout it all, Olivia remained calm and focused. She had been in the trenches for so long, working tirelessly to get to this point, that she now understood the importance of maintaining clarity and direction. She wasn't just reacting to the demands of the moment. She was leading, making decisions, and guiding her team toward success. When the day of the event arrived, Olivia found herself standing at the venue, overseeing the final details. The event was a success. The clients were impressed with the quality of the food, the efficiency of the staff, and the seamless execution of the evening. It was a monumental moment, a moment that marked the beginning of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. As the night drew to a close, Olivia stood in the corner of the venue, watching as her team worked with precision and grace. They were a reflection of her, strong, capable, and unwavering. The quiet triumph she had felt months ago had evolved into something deeper, something more powerful. This wasn't just about the bakery. This was about the legacy she was building, the legacy she was leaving for her son, and the impact she was having on her employees and her community. Weeks later, as Olivia sat in the quiet of her office, a stack of documents in front of her, she realized just how far she had come. The building that had once seemed like an impossible dream was now hers. The catering business was thriving, the second location was moving forward, and her team was stronger than ever. She had done it. She had built something from the ground up, something that wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from Nate. "Hey, Mom. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. I see all the work you've put in and it's paying off. You've created something amazing." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Nate had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. And now, as she looked at everything she had accomplished, she realized that this success wasn't just hers. It was for him too. It was for their future, for the future of the bakery, and for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't achieve more. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the streets, Olivia leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. There would always be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, Olivia knew she was ready. She had built her foundation, and now nothing could stop her. This was only the beginning.